I don't know if you remember, but at last year's Hillman, we learned that evening that Trump had fired James Comey. And I remember, we tore up the magazine, and the second thing I think I did was try to find what Dahlia Lithwick had written. I found it the next morning, and it's extraordinary. Go back and read it, because she kind of charts the year we've lived and reminds you why many consider Dahlia one of the nation's most trusted, clear-eyed, plain-speaking, and just plain funny commentators on the nation's high court, and all matters legal and many illegal. She will make you laugh through your tears as she skewers the latest injustice and pleads with eloquence for the law to live up to its promise of providing justice for all. As a senior editor for Slate, for 2 decades, Dahlia's columns have fearlessly and fairly scrutinized the failings and promise of the justice system. Dahlia elegantly untangles the most complex debates. She analyzes the theatrics of the American legal system in such a way that it permits even those of us who lack a JD to easily grasp the essence of legal matters. Now, not that those with a JD don't value her. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has called Dahlia, quote, spicy. In 2017, Dahlia's analysis was more essential than ever. She wrote about the Supreme Court's confirmation hearing for Neil Gorsuch, extracting insights on the judge's views on religious freedom that other legal experts missed. She covered the alt-right rally in her hometown of Charlottesville, documenting what she called alt-left, what the so-called alt-left was doing during the horrifying event, and exploring how the Nazi march changed her feelings on the First Amendment. She also brilliantly synthesized the last decade of Second Amendment jurisprudence, explaining how the Supreme Court created a gun right crisis that it is unwilling to solve. And in the year of Me Too, Dahlia shared her own story of harassment by Judge Alex Kaczynski, a piece that inspired many other women to come forward about the judge, who soon after announced his retirement. One of the features of Dahlia's work that most delights her hardcore fans, and there are many, can be described as erudite goofiness. One of her essays, quote, Order Muppets and Chaos Muppets, has been taught in creative writing seminars and remains a touchstone of online culture. So in this year of Whiplash News, Lithwick has never wavered in her passionate commitment to the importance of maintaining both the rule of law and our shared humanity. And if I might, on a personal note, my daughter Nika graduates next week from Columbia Law School. Like Dahlia, she will clerk on the Ninth Circuit starting this fall. I hope I've given Nika a sense of compassion and justice. I've certainly reminded her of the perils of editing a political magazine. But perhaps my great gift was introducing Nika a year ago to Dahlia's writing, which will be, I am sure, her guide to sanity, laughter, and humanity while clerking and beyond. It is my great pleasure to present Dahlia Lithwick with the Hillman Prize for Opinion and Analysis.
It is such a joy to be here tonight with so many journalists that I adore and revere. I think if I've learned anything in the past year and a half, it's that journalism is a team sport. And if you try to go it alone for any length of time, you will come back worn down to a nub. I want to thank the Hillman Foundation. I can't think of a more meaningful award than one that honors journalism in service of the common good. And so many of tonight's honorees that I share this dais with have really illuminated the spirit of Hillman, the idea that the great issues of the day need to be revealed. And there's a through line for so many of the awards that we saw tonight, people who are invisible to the naked eye, somehow puncturing the sort of trifecta of Stormy Daniels, Michael Avenatti, and Donald Trump, and punching through and making visible that which is unjust and needs to be visible. And so I'm so honored to share this evening with them. And I also have to say that this particular award takes my breath away. I share it with friends and heroes, Rebecca Traister, Addie Stan, Jelani Cobb. I just can't even imagine being in their company. I think of them as heroes of the resistance journalism. Now, I could certainly talk to you for the next few minutes about the stories I've written in my beat on the legal justice and the courts. There's been so much, including, as Katrina said, white supremacists in my hometown, the ineffable moral authority of Me Too and the ways it touched my life. And I could deplore for you the stacking of the federal courts with bloggers and the easy cruelty that you heard about towards migrants and refugees, ripping families apart. I could talk about the travel ban just heard at the Supreme Court with the caution that the president deserves a presumption of regularity in his dealings with Muslims from foreign countries. And talk about other stories I've reported, including threats to young women, migrants in this country who are in DHS custody and cannot get an abortion, despite the fact that state courts have authorized them. And the fact that there are children in Puerto Rico who have no electricity and children in Flint who still don't have clean water. All of that is my beat. But you know all of this. It's not new, but it's news. And I thank you for caring about it as much as you still do. And I salute the folks in the room who write about it, even though it feels like Groundhog Day and we write these same stories every day. I salute you for trying to break through and be heard, even when you file a story at 3 and by 4 it's completely obsolete. So I wonder if with my little bit of time I could do something a little bit odd with you tonight and share a weird old parable that's been sitting on my chest for 2 years. It's a story that I heard as a child, and I repressed it for 40 years. I heard it actually on an album for my children. An album is something that the Velociraptor would use to listen to music when I was a child. And this was an album of folk stories, and it sort of imprinted in my memory and disappeared and came back around the time of the 2016 election. The story is credited to Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, who was a radical, transformative thinker and mystic who lived in the late 18th century. And if you'll indulge me, I just want to read it. The story is called Harvest of Madness. There was once a king who was also an astrologer. By studying the stars, he learned that the harvest of wheat that year would be tainted, and anyone who ate of it would go mad. The king revealed this prophecy to his friend, the prime minister, and asked if there was anything they could do. The prime minister said, "Let us set aside some of last year's wheat. That way we do not have to eat the tainted grain." The king thought about this for a while, and then he said, "It is not possible to set aside enough of last year's wheat for everyone. But if we alone eat the good wheat, we will be the only sane people in a mad world. All of the others will look at us as if we were the ones who are mad. So we will have to eat this tainted wheat, but let us place a mark on our foreheads to remind one another that we are mad like everyone else." I know, it's a feel-good story of the year. The story has come to obsess me, partly because it so aptly describes this moment in which we find ourselves as journalists. We've descended into this national madness, where lies are truth, and truth is fake news, and ugliness is beauty, a world in which the adults around us are children, and the children of Parkland are the only adults. Indeed, I think many folks in this room, like me, find themselves on television night after night saying, like the king and the prime minister from the story, this isn't normal, this isn't moral, this isn't right, and we are dismissed as hysterics and lunatics for doing so. But more pointedly for this room, I've come to believe that the wheat in this parable is the news that we have to consume. And we have to consume it because there is no option to ignore it. And so we eat of it, and we eat of it until some days we feel we are half mad ourselves. For me, the story keeps staying with me and lingers in my heart because of this image of the mark on our foreheads. There need to be at least 2 people in this story, the king and the prime minister, so that we can signal to one another what's really going on. And for me, this mark on our forehead signals that we can and have to descend into the daily madness of our news, these glittering cathedrals of lies, triple-decker lie sandwiches that we watch every day and cannot believe. And yet, the mark tells us that we see one another. We see these markings, we know who we were, and we know what we can hope to be again. And to me, journalism and the law have saved me this year, because lawyers and judges and the reporters who refuse to eat the lies and call them delicious are the people that have marks that I see every day. I look around this room and I see so many of you with that same invisible mark on your forehead. It looks a lot like mine, and I'm so glad and so humbled, so honored to be in a room full of people who still eat the wheat and tell the truth. I have to tell you that for most of my 2 decades as an opinion writer, I could reflect the world through a bunch of distorting but amusing mirrors. As Katrina said, I write about the law, which means that I can say that there are immutable truths, there are facts. And I use humor, and I use doctrine, and I use access to important people in the law. And some of these are ways to hide. They're ways to entertain, but also to hide the person underneath. But when actual Nazis parade through your actual hometown, when you are Me Tooing an Article 3 judge after keeping a secret for 20 years, some of those tricks fall away. If you eat enough tainted wheat, some of those tricks have to fall away. And so I ask you all, particularly the journalists in the room, to be kind to yourselves, be kind to one another, as you have been kind to me this evening and to the other honorees. I ask you to be generous with these superpowers we still have as journalists, the capacity to listen, to empathize, and to understand fear for what it is. And even when the wheat is choking and dry, I ask you to at least tell the truth every day. I really want to thank the Hillman Foundation and the family of Sidney Hillman. I want to thank my editors at Slate, especially Julia Turner, Josh Levine, Jeremy Stahl, Mark Stern, and Susan Matthews, and my producers at Amicus, Tony Field and Sarah Birmingham, for making the decision that we as a magazine would mark ourselves as the tellers of truth, no matter what happens. I need to thank my family who's here tonight, especially my husband, Aaron, who has basically done the functional equivalent of holding my hair while I barf up tainted wheat every single day for almost a year and a half. And I want to thank my sons, Kobe and Sofer, who are here tonight, because they remind me every single day that we have to tell the truth so that they can tell the truth. For all of you in this room, for the Hillman Foundation, for everybody whose invisible marks shine through tonight and tomorrow, even when we're not together. This is such an honor. Thank you.